There's this trend, and there's some data that suggests that PMOs in general are becoming much more strategic partners. And in some cases that may be in title. There's more and more organizations are seeing a value in ePMOs, right? So strategic PMOs, executive PMOs, you can label those. Lindsay here in front had the opportunity to partner with her last year at a PMO symposium here in London. And there was some research that shared the different types of PMOs that organizations are employing. This is some work that PMI did a study a couple of years ago that identified different categories of PMOs, whether your project support, so your focus is really on process and tools and how to get things done and providing those to the organization, whether you're more that center of excellence, that knowledge sharing type of an organization, whether down here you're much more at a project level and you're kind of adjusting that PMO to meet the needs of a particular project or large organization, or whether this enterprise or organizational unit, kind of the strategic PMO. And what we're seeing from a trend standpoint is still two things. Actually, I don't have a slide for this, but some of the data that was shared at the symposium last year is that PMOs still are having to find we're seeing most organizations are still struggling with trying to convince senior management on the value of PMOs. They're viewed as overhead in many cases. They're not really seen as strategic. And juxtaposed with that is the most successful organizations relative to the kind of the PMO space is when they can get up to this quadrant and they can provide more insight into the running of the business, not just the execution of the business. As with anything we do, when they're seen as more of a strategic partner. But we're going to talk a little bit more about this particular dynamic, whether you work with these four categories or other categories. Each of these have implications. The structure of that PMO, the kind of culture you're embedded in. And while some PMOs may try and do a number of these, what we're finding is that there's certainly value in each of these. This is not to suggest that we all should be trying to be an enterprise PMO. These all provide great value to organizations. But what we need to do is, while the influence of enterprise PMOs is growing, at the risk of some of these being seen as overhead or a nice to have versus a strategic partner, how can we help these kinds of PMOs have that more, the organization views them as more of a strategic partner so that they can do the good work that they can do, whether they own the resources or not. And organizations that tend to own the resources, it kind of depends, but in many cases, it has more to do about structure. But these kinds of PMOs tend to more own resources, although it really varies quite a bit. There's some great studies that we can, if you're interested in finding out more, some different work that both we've done out of the ESI London office last year relative to some trends in PMOs. This is just one particular item from the study, but what this particular focus showed is that in terms of organizationally, the kinds of metrics that are being tracked, there's still the predominant one has to do with delivery, traditional measures, on time, on budget. So it's this reporting function. But more and more we're seeing that PMOs are looking at the strategic alignment as we just heard about at B of A, Bank of America, and certainly these other kinds of metrics. So this gives you very broad swath sense of PMOs across lots of industries and in those four different categories, a lot of functions. But certainly this has come up significantly in terms of PMOs in I think 4 years we've been doing that annual study, and this number has gone from more in this level 4 years ago to becoming much more predominant now. So this is kind of a gratuitous slide. If you don't believe in PMOs, there's a lot of data that does show that they can have a powerful suggestion. I say gratuitous because I feel like somewhat I'm preaching to the choir here. For those of you that have PMOs, obviously you see the value because you're part of that organization. But there is data, this again comes from some PMI data, that suggests significant improvements in terms of on the positive relative to effectiveness in these metrics, and also as well as eliminating some of these kind of metrics with the value of PMO. And so we do find that they're becoming more strategic, but a lot of the effectiveness of PMOs has to do with their ability to, in essence, educate, influence the executive level, and that helps maintain their continued funding and kind of uplifting the view of PMOs not as a nice to have, but actually being a strategic partner at the table.